Hello, everyone. Welcome into the Guilty as Charged podcast. Today is the first day the Los Angeles Chargers could franchise tag Mike Williams. Will they? I don't know. In the past, with Hunter Henry and Melvin Ingram, they've waited till the end of February to mid-March to even get those tags done. So does it happen today? I don't know. If it does, great. But if not, whatever. Don't panic. In the meantime, I want to figure out what Mike Williams' average annual value should be. He'll probably get more. I assume he's going to get more, but I wanted to essentially calculate what that average annual value should be. And this started as something where I just wanted to look at what he did in 2021 and use the composite rankings that I've been doing to compare that to other receivers that were the highest paid receivers in the league. Where does he rank among those guys in 2021? And, we'll talk about that in a bit. But some people pointed out, hey, maybe let's talk about 2020 as well to figure out where he was and then how he got to 2021 and what has changed since then. So today we're going to talk about a couple of things. We're going to talk about the composite rankings for 2020, which you see on your screen right now. We're going to talk about his composite rankings in 2021. We're going to talk about how much of a movement he had in those rankings overall and the biggest ranking changes in individual stat categories from 2020 to 2021. And then to help us calculate that average annual value, we're going to talk about games missed. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to talk about, or I calculated, I did simple math, the amount of games, the percentage of games played by each receiver before they got that new contract. So, if it's Mike Williams, it's the 5 years. If it's Julio Jones, it's 8 years or whatever. How many games did that person play before they got their current new contract? So I think using that to help calculate in the end what I think his value should be annually, I think that's a good way to look at it, because everyone that's a Chargers fan that's listening to this knows about Mike Williams and the injury history and all that. But I don't think we take the time to talk about what other guys were at the time that they got their new contract. So let's start with 2020. And it's very obvious on your screen here, not hard to figure out. Mike Williams was dead last among these receivers. Now, these receivers are guys. So I started this composite ranking with the 2021 rankings, and I took those guys, made a list of the 20 receivers that were the highest paid receivers in the league, added Mike Williams to that list, and compared their contracts. I went back and did 2020 next, which means some guys were missing from this list because they didn't play enough snaps in 2020. So Kennedy Golladay, Julio Jones, Cortland Sutton, those guys won't be on this list, but they will be on the next list, I'm pretty sure. So obviously, Mike Williams being dead last year in 2020 is not good. That was a product of Herbert being new, a game of Tyrod Taylor, Shane Steichen, Anthony Lynn, the offensive line, the way he was used, all that. And also because I think he was banged up, if I'm not mistaken. So in red here are the categories he was a bottom 3 finisher in. So yards per route run, yards after the catch per reception, touchdowns, yards, missed tackles forced, and first downs. That's a lot of, let's see. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 categories out of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So almost more than half of the categories he was bottom 3 in. That's obviously not good. And it was at that point, and after the last season, or I should say 2 seasons ago now, because now we're in 2022 season. At that point, most of us were saying, hey, we need to upgrade. We should potentially move on. And maybe you can work out the tag this year, or the 5th year option, and that's fine. But, is he worth it? A guy that, again, finished bottom 3 in 6 of 11 categories. Oh, 10 categories. Composite doesn't count as a category, although I guess he did finish bottom in that category as well. So not great, right? So enter 2021. What changed for him? Again, so there's a couple of names missing here, so the ranking will change a little bit, right? Just because there are more names added to the list. But he is, 18th here, 18th out of 18 in 2020. And in 2021, he jumps all the way to 5th. Mike Williams finished 5th out of those same receivers, plus the 3 that were missing. So of all the guys, the highest paid receivers in the league right now, and granted, some guys are getting new contracts this season, but of the highest paid receivers in 2021, Mike Williams was 5th best. Not a ton of top finishes, only top 3 finishes in yards after the catch per reception and yards per reception, but still a whole heck of a lot better. The only thing he finished double digits in was drop rate. I believe he was last in that. No, sorry. He was 3rd worst in that category behind Robbie Anderson and Corey Davis, ahead of those guys. So not great in the drop category. We know that, but everything else, a top 7 finisher, and all those other categories. That's really, really good. And it speaks to Justin Herbert's development, Mike Williams' development, Joe Lombardi's offense, the way they were using him, and of course, his health and the volume that he got. Now, of course, some of this is because they played 17 games versus 16. So like the touchdowns going up, the yards going up, maybe even stuff like missed tackles forced and first downs kind of goes up. But again, this is compared to everyone else this year when they all had the chance to play 17 games. So he jumped quite a bit. And who are the biggest movers that in this past season? I think this is something I just want to look at for fun. Who were the biggest movers? And to me, or not to me, according to the jump in rankings, the biggest mover was Mike Williams. Nobody took a bigger step forward from 2020 to 2021 than Mike Williams. Now, unfortunately, that does get the classic, oh, well, it was a contract year. He took a big step forward. That's a red flag to some people. And I could understand why. It is kind of a little asterisk when his best year by far and his biggest leap, his big leap forward came at a contract season. But at least he took a step forward rather than a step backwards. And then we're going to be paying him X amount of money. So I'd rather him be taking steps forward, I hope, than steps backward. The other big movers, the two other biggest movers, one was Cooper Kupp, who is arguably the best receiver in the league at this point and Super Bowl MVP. And then Tyler Lockett took a big step forward. I don't think people were talking about him all that much. But in terms of the composite ranking, do I think he's the third best receiver in the league or whatever? No, but he did take a big leap forward, and that's awesome. Good for him. As far as the stat changes for Mike Williams' biggest changes in stats rankings were yards per route run jumping from 18th to 5th, yards after the catch per reception jumping from 14th to 3rd, and total yards jumping from 18th to 7th. And then I guess for first downs, 16th to 7th. But I really do love that, the two that I think are the most important, yards per route run and yards after the catch per reception, those were the two he jumped the most in. And yards per reception went down just a tiny bit, but he only dropped one ranking in that category. That's not all that bad. And I actually don't know if his specific number was higher or lower, but his ranking did drop one from first to second. Not bad. The drop rate is concerning. That did go up. It just seemed like everyone's went up. I think it's partially because of scheme, Herbert throwing hard, whatever you want to call it. That did go down, but that was really it. The only significant category that dropped was drop rate. Everything else jumped up. And I just think that's so cool to see him take an average jump of 5.2 in the ranking. So we'll call it 5. So every category took an average of 5 rankings higher, 5, players higher in the rankings. And that's really good. That doesn't sound like a lot, but for him to jump 5 in each category is pretty good. And again, it amounts to him, A, taking the biggest leap among everyone, and B, ending up at 5th on this list, a guy that was 18th in 2020, all the way to being a top 5 receiver statistically on paper, and that's it in 2021. Now we can talk about him getting a lot of yards after the catch or yards per reception because, Cleveland couldn't cover, or because the Eagles couldn't cover, or because the Steelers didn't cover, or whatever. But then I'd have to go through everyone and talk about that. And so I'm not going to do that. I think the really interesting one here is games missed. And this one is a bit of a surprise to me. Gun to my head, would I have guessed that Mike Williams was only missing a small, I guess, amount of games compared to some other guys? I honestly wouldn't have guessed that. Now he has missed time, and he's not exactly in the upper tier. I have this sorted by colors right now, just for sort of color scheme. So games missed in green, or excuse me, games played in green, those are people at 90% or higher, so they got the A's. Anyone in yellow, it was in the 80s, and anyone in red was under 80s. There was one guy in the 60s, that was Cortland Sutton. So one name to point out before we get to Mike Williams is Keenan Allen. And when he got his contract, he had only played, of the possible games up to this current contract, about 77% of his games. So he's one of the 4 worst games played guys, and he got that big contract from the Chargers. So that is worth keeping in mind, knowing that Mike Williams has missed time as well, but they still gave Keenan Allen that contract. Now, Keenan Allen also really, really deserved that contract and was one of the best receivers in the league pretty easily at that point, whereas Mike Williams, a lot more shaky situation. And Keenan Allen, it was more of I tore my ACL and I ruptured my kidney. What a crazy injury, right? Just kind of freak stuff. Whereas I think Mike Williams feels more like a banged up, consistent injury kind of situation. But Mike Williams has played about 89% of the possible games that he was able to play. Now, does that mean that he played 89% of all the games he was able to, and that he played 100% of those games? No, we've seen Mike Williams leave, halfway through a game, a quarter of the way through the game, not be able to finish a drive or a series or whatever. But again, like I said, I would have to go through everyone else and do that. So I'm not going to do that. So him finishing, I should have put the percent here. So this is the ranking. So this is where these guys ranked in terms of games played. So guys like Adam Thielen, number 1, Jarvis Landry, number 1, and then Cortland Sutton being dead last. Mike Williams came at 11th out of 19 in terms of games played. Now there are ties, so I guess you could say that he's either worse or better than 11th. But I just like keeping things 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 all the way to 19, rather than going like 1 and then 4 and then 7, 6 or 8, 9, 10 and then 14. So 11th most games played in terms of percentage. That's not great. That's about right in the middle, but still, that's honestly more than I would have guessed. So taking that into account, understanding his composite rank being 5th in terms of 2021, and understanding obviously that he did take that big leap. So we're going to take that 2021 ranking where he was 5th. And we're going to take the 11th ranking in terms of games played. And we're going to take that and compare it to the contracts of other guys and come up with a number that best fits exactly what Mike Williams should be paid annually. Does this make sense? I don't know. But I think it ended up being a number that I thought kind of seemed fair. So here's how it ended up. I put everyone, same guys, where they were ranked, right? And their average ranking in terms of average annual value. I just did that for myself. But here we're going to talk about the number, or the amount that they were making, the games played ranking, and then their average ranking. And I took all of those, and Mike Williams' average ranking, when you take composite ranking and games played ranking, and you average those, he was 8th, which is with Cooper Kupp. I'm not saying it was Cooper Kupp, but in terms of where he ranked games played, and then with his 2021 composite, he was ranked 8th. So I took the average of every contract above Mike Williams, right? So the guys that were better and have played more games, or at least in terms of their average ranking, you take those two together, their average ranking was higher than Mike Williams. Those guys above Mike Williams were making about $18 million. Everyone below Mike Williams was making about $16.9 million. So I took the average of the 18 and the 16.9 and ended up at $17.45982,143 million. And that to me is right where I think it would be fair to pay Mike Williams annually. Will he get more than that? Probably. I think it starts really at 18 million. But if we're talking about what is fair value, if I'm going to take the 2021 composite ranking where he was 5th and a games played average ranking, and then put that into that average ranking between the two, and look at the average annual value of everybody else, 17.45 million sounds about right. And I think that's kind of fair. I think most people are talking about his extension being somewhere between 16 and 18. Again, I do think it is higher. I do think it starts at 18, but I think aiming and getting somewhere close to 17.45 million is not bad. So let's just call it 17.5. So him getting $17.5 million per year would not be that bad. That would be currently better than Mike Evans, Adam Thielen, Jarvis Landry, Chris Godwin. Sorry, he's on a franchise tag. That'd be more than Cooper Kupp. Cooper Kupp should definitely get more money soon. More than Brandon Cooks, more than Stephon Diggs, more than Robbie Anderson, more than Robert Woods, more than Corey Davis, Cortland Sutton, and that's it. I think that's a good mix, right? The guys that are paid more probably deserve it. They do deserve it. Tyreek Hill, DeAndre Hopkins with that ridiculous contract. Keenan Allen actually being this low is a bit sad in terms of games played and his composite ranking in 2021. At this point, him being paid 20 point, he's paid the most of the guys that were below Mike Williams in the composite rankings in the average ranking. And that's a little worrisome, of course, but that's a topic for another time. So that's what I ended up with. Let's call it $17.5 million. That's the number that I'm looking for Mike Williams to be considered fair value based on how he played in 2021, because it is always, of course, what have you done for me lately league, and then based on his number of game or percent of games played. So whether you agree or disagree, I don't know, but I think that is the best number I could go to, instead of just looking at the list of players that are paid X amount and just guessing where he's going to get paid. I tried to calculate exactly where he should be getting paid. And I think the number does make sense. Let me know what you guys think. Whether you think that's too high, too low, just right. I actually think that's a really solid number. So they get really close to that, I'll be happy. Guys, let me know what you think in the comment section below. Take care. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. And as always, bolt up.